Good morning. Okay, we are live. Thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to our Think Thursdays webinar series. I'm Susan Franceschini, the Executive Director for ThinkLA. We're so happy you could join us today. Before we get started, we of course have a few reminders about some upcoming events that we have. You'll want to make sure you check out our ThinkLA calendar and website for upcoming events too, because they're happening every day. We're updating that. So we've got our Industry Accelerator and Career Bootcamp happening on June 23rd. And on June 24th, join us for the Evolution of Studio Marketing presented by Xander. And again, we've got new events happening, like our sports marketing event. Tim Ellis, CMO of the NFL, will be joining us, so check that out. And our Cannabis Summit is going to be held on August 6th. And probably one of our biggest events of the year, our Idea Awards Gala, starts on August 13th. So that is going to be virtual. It's going to be new. It's going to be exciting. And I hope you'll join us for that. And again, you can register on the website and get more information there as it becomes available. We are very fortunate today to have our friends from the 4As joining us to talk about the state of the industry and how agencies are navigating the important issues of diversity, inclusion, equality, as well as the impact of COVID-19. Our industry is definitely in a very unique and challenging situation. So joining us today from the 4As is Marla Kaplowitz, President and CEO, and Juan Suarez, Senior Vice President of the Western Region from the 4As. Our moderator today is Pete Imwalle, Executive VP and COO of RPA and co-president of ThinkLA. During the conversation, if you have any questions, we've got a Q&A button down at the bottom. You know how to do that. If we have time at the end, we'll get to those. We encourage you to ask throughout the program. Like I said, we'll address them at the end. Thank you again for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to Pete to lead our conversation. Here you go, Pete.
Thank you, Susan. It is really a pleasure today to welcome Marla and Juan. And I just want to start off by saying good morning to those of you on the West Coast and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast that are tuning in and watching. One of the good outputs of COVID is that it's taught us all that geography doesn't need to be a barrier to more conversation. And we've been able to include a lot more people in things because it doesn't require a trip on a plane and everything else. For those that have not had the opportunity to hear Marla and Juan speak, they're two of the really good people in this industry, and I've gotten to know them both over the last few years since they've joined the 4As. So we're really happy to have them here today and have our voices shared. I think one of the really important things that I've recognized from the agency point of view is that one of the challenges that COVID has presented us is that groups like the 4As and ThinkLA that make a lot of their revenue off of events and experiential types of things struggling to meet some of the challenges right now, because those events, ones like this that might be a breakfast where we would be sitting at a stage and selling seats, are not really functional right now. And we're not sure when those things will come back, but we'll get to COVID. I think that we had this planned a couple months ago. The idea was, let's talk about COVID and agency resiliency and how this is affecting what we're doing as an industry and what it is that we can do to overcome the challenges. And 3.5 weeks ago, that topic changed drastically when we found ourselves in the middle of another epidemic and another conversation that affects our country, our companies, and our industry. And Susan and Marla and Juan are all people that I've had conversations about diversity and race and gender and equality with before. So it really felt natural for us to sort of pivot this conversation and really start off there. We'll definitely come back in probably halfway through and shift the topic to the business of agencies and how we get going. But we really wanted to start talking about the importance of race and diversity. So Juan and Marla, welcome. Marla, we had a good talk about this the other day. I think that there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of things going on right now. The real conversation has been like, well, what have agencies done? What has the advertising industry done? What have we done well? What could we do much better on? I think one thing we can all agree on is, though there's been effort, none of us have seen the kinds of success that we really want in this area. So I'll open it up to you guys to talk here.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Pete. ThinkLA is such a fantastic organization. And when I was CEO of MEC, we had our team in LA that were so engaged in all of the activity and the events. So I'm really thrilled to be part of just connecting with the team and the organization. So this has been a topic that we've talked about for decades, centuries, but has just really come to the forefront. And I think there are many of us, I know I have been asking, why now? Like, what is different? How do we make sure that this moment is different and that we don't let it go past just saying, okay, we're going to put the same kind of pledges in place, or let's have the same kind of conversation. This has to be a moment of action, and not action a year from now, but actions that are happening now. And there has to be real accountability behind that. And I was talking with one leader who said it really starts with awareness. And before we can jump to action, we have to take ownership. And so each of us as individuals have to take ownership of what our privilege is, what our responsibilities are as leaders, as individuals, as people in society, in our community, but also who we are within our own professional roles and organizations. And I think it's been an incredibly reflective time. It's been a really painful time. I've had many conversations with people in the industry, with employees, and as much as you think you know, you really don't until you sit and truly listen. And we became very committed to helping agencies try and figure this out once and for all and really move to the action stage. So 2 weeks ago, we had put out a statement and we felt it was responsible for us to be pushing agencies to think about, and it was 4 simple actions: hire Black people, hear Black people, promote Black people, make advertising for everyone. We had intended to follow that up last week with some really tangible actions and a guide around diversity and equity and inclusion. And last Tuesday, 600 plus Black professionals led by Nathan Young and Bennett D. Bennett came out and said, we demand action. Here are 12, and I would say very basic steps that we expect agencies to take. And how can we move this conversation forward to true action? So we commended them for doing that. It was incredibly brave and time for someone to say, enough is enough. We have to move forward. So we had conversations with them and we wanted to support them. And yesterday they announced that their organization is called 600 and Rising. And so there are different ways that you can get involved. If you are a Black professional, you can become one of the now, I think as of yesterday morning, it was 1,100 plus. I'm sure that number is much higher. Or you can sign up to become an ally and get information about what you can do to help improve not only yourself, but your organization. So we are finding ways to partner with them. And we also shared out with agencies some of the actions that they can take. This is really up to each agency, whether you're an independent or part of a holding company, to determine what do you need to do. This is a journey for everyone, and everyone's in a different place. You need to look inward and figure out where you're at and what you need to do. We're seeing agencies reveal their diversity data. That's something that has never really been done before. That is significant. I'm seeing some real shifts here. And the focus has always been on the diversity and inclusion leader within an agency. If your agency has one or your company has one, it can't be up to one individual. And I will say it starts at the top. It starts from the leader, and it has to get pushed down to everyone in the organization in terms of that accountability. And people need to be empowered and given the investment to actually put the types of programs in place that need to happen. So that's just kind of a start of where we're at. And Juan, if you want to add anything there, because I know you've been talking to a lot of agency leaders about this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, again, thank you, Susan and Pete and ThinkLA for hosting myself and Marla. We're obviously honored to join this conversation and be part of it. A few things to add. It's a great perspective to be on the ground and really listening to some of the efforts that agencies are taking on a day-to-day basis. I think we're definitely in a much better place today in terms of, you know, the overall national movements that are starting to come out, like 600 and Rising, which Marla just talked about. But I want to also talk about some of the things that I was pretty impressed about that started happening, you know, 2-3 weeks ago when this was just getting started. And you know, at the 4As, many of us at the regional level lead what we call councils and forums and committees around different functional disciplines. And so we get to hear on a regular basis kind of the talk of the town. You know, what is keeping agencies up at night? What are the things that they're dealing with? And this pretty much bubbled to the top very early on, a couple of weeks ago, before there was any, you know, national organization around it or response. And I just want to call out a few of the things that have caught my attention, starting with some of the small changes that came about pretty quickly. Things like CEOs asking or providing a forum for employees to speak up, right, and talk about their experiences with racial and racial discrimination, providing an opportunity for that communication to start happening. There was other things like, you know, where most of us are working from home now. So one thing that caught my attention, there was an agency that took what they called their coffee money, you know, their coffee and snacks money, and reallocated it to a local nonprofit that supported Black causes and such. So these were kind of the start of some small movements that you know, kind of piqued my attention. But when we fast forward to what we're seeing today, we're starting to see some big changes. One of them, some agencies have been as bold as to, in a matter of days, put a stake in the ground and go all the way up to the board. You know, reevaluate their leadership composition, their board composition, and make changes of what their board is looking like. You know, who's in it, who's participating, and what's the representation from a, you know, racial background perspective. I think the other thing that caught my attention is pushing and providing information to their employees and their staff at the agency level to know who their state government elected officials were, and how to engage with them, and how to have their voice heard. And that's something that, you know, as agencies, we've not necessarily done in the past. So, and more importantly, I think the last thing I'll end it with is something Marla alluded to, is this is different. You know, we've in the past seen leadership, you know, CEOs and the likes, to address these kinds of issues by appointing a committee or delegating to the folks on the HR side or somebody in their executive team. This is one of the first times that I'm seeing CEOs very early on saying, this is my problem and I want to own the solution. And that's, again, something that I started seeing weeks, not days ago, but very early on in the process, where CEOs and most of the agency leadership taking a proactive stand and saying, look, I know we don't have all the answers right away. I know this is going to evolve with time, but I want this to make this one of my priorities for the year. I'm not going to delegate it. I'm going to own the solution.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. A lot of us have been having this conversation at the agency level, and also ThinkLA and 4As. One of the challenges with diversity in general is that what happens is there's a certain level of training in management and supervisors and unconscious bias training and things like that. But every time we hold a panel during Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month, or those groups create programming throughout the year, I go to those events and I see the same bubble of people every single time, whether it's inside my agency, inside the industry. There's a group of people that I would consider diversity enthusiasts. And those people can't carry this whole message. So even when there are leaders who have been interested in and been participating in the conversation, one of the things that I don't think we've done enough of is make the diversity question a part of our agenda. It's been much more of a raise your hand if you want to get involved in this, and people come and get involved, and those passionate people can only push so far. To me, it gets me to our next point on this is, why now? Why is this different? And I think that the bad side of why now, why is this different, is that we saw 8 minutes and 46 seconds of video that just made it too hard for people to dismiss it as not my problem, someone else's problem. And we've been talking about allyship in this industry for a couple of years now. The last year really talked a lot about allyship and privilege. And the first time that I really saw it take effect was the last 3.5 weeks, when people really started to say, this is my problem, this does affect me, this does affect my coworkers. And I think that that's what makes this different. And that's what also means that it will become not a conversation for hand raisers, but a conversation for everyone. And one of the things I know we talked about was training. For me, looking back, having been in this industry for 35 years, we started talking about sexual harassment and sexism in this business 25 years ago, and we started sending managers and leaders to training. There wasn't a real social norm change until we got everyone in all the agencies trained on those topics to say, you may think that it's just flirting, but when you do it, you're actually objectifying women and you're changing expectations for their role in the company. And I think we're at that point now with diversity where it can't just be unconscious bias training for leaders and hiring managers. It's for everybody. And if there's anything good coming out of this, it's the fact that the sleeping masses have woken up to it. So I know we had a little bit of conversation about why now. I do think one of the conversations I've had with our Black employees is this fear that everybody's excited right now, but like gun control after Sandy Hook, is this going to go away when the protest stops? I think this is different, and I would love the perspective that you guys have seen too.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of concern about, I'll wait and see. I'm just not sure. And I've talked to Black employees who have reached out to their grandparents and their parents to try and understand, is this really different? Should I pay attention, or is this more of the same? And they get mixed feedback on that because they're also trying to understand it. Someone said something to me yesterday about the why now, because I've also been trying to figure that out, and we have to use this moment to recognize it has to be different. So I always think things happen when there's like this perfect storm, and we've had this perfect storm of a government where we've kind of gone backwards in terms of some civility or human rights. Even an example of under the Obama administration at the beginning of 2018, companies were going to be compelled to share their diversity data, similar to what happens in the UK. That was repealed by the Trump administration at the 2017. That's just one example of something that had happened. So you've got that on top of the entire world experiencing COVID at the same time, and just the fragility and also the connection of humanity. And what someone said to me yesterday, and this kind of hit home, is we took away all the distractions. So these videos are not new, but you didn't have the distraction of football or basketball or some other programming. This is all you get to see on the news. It doesn't matter where you turn, your social media feed, whatever channel you're going on, whatever publication. And so everyone was forced to deal with it. And because people are now I also think that the country has shifted, the globe has shifted in the past few years. And you see it even in like the Edelman Trust Barometer survey, where people expect companies to take a stand and there's real accountability for actions. We have Gen Z coming up now, they're adults and they are demanding change and for companies to take a stand, but they want to see, and they're going to hold people accountable. So if you aren't moving forward, you're going to lose your employees, and every company, that is their number one asset. So if they don't make it happen, there's going to be revolt internally because it's not just the right thing to do, it's the expected, and it has to move forward. So I too believe it's different, but it's incumbent on me as a leader, you, everyone, to make sure that it happens and that there is real accountability behind that. And that is something that we as the 4As want to make sure that we support agencies, but we also help them drive that accountability, and that we don't look at this as proprietary. Let's share the great ideas. So we have a diversity and equity Congress, we're calling it Equity and Inclusion Congress, that we're going to be doing September 21st and 22nd, where what we want is we're right now doing a diversity survey so that we have an understanding of the agency. Where is the agency industry at right now? So we can do some benchmarking so people have context. They've always known where they stood, but how do we look at it as an industry? How do we share that information at a high level and then get everyone together to share? Here are the plans we've been put in place. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. And come together in that way.
I completely agree. And I will just follow up a little bit. One of the comments that you and I had before this is people look to the 4As, they look to ThinkLA, they look to their agency leadership, and everybody sort of wants to say, what are you doing about it? And I think one of the really important things is having each person take some accountability for what am I doing about it. I've had managers ask me, well, what are we going to do about this? And what are we going to do about that? And I said, you know, I haven't actually hired anybody in 3 years. You hire people all the time. What are you going to do about it? And how are you going to change? We're going to provide a lot different structure. We're going to get better input. We're going to do a lot of things, but it really is going to come down to individuals changing their mindset. And I think that's what's so important about this moment right now, is that people are gathering the importance of it. And I really believe, though we've talked about diversity and cared about diversity, we've been okay with not succeeding. And I think that one of the other things we talked about is we put programs in place to try and solve gender imbalance. And what we've seen is incredible velocity in the industry and in our companies. We've been able to change that quickly. The same programs were put in place for diversity that we had for gender, and they're not reaping the same results. So one of the things that we've been talking about at all these levels is, and this is a really good place for us to share because it's not an individual problem, it's a collective problem. How do we get past the fact that we're doing better in recruiting, but we're not doing as well in creating that velocity and keeping people in the industry? And part of that is if you're Black or Hispanic in this industry and you don't see enough people at the top who look like you bail out. But it's the same kind of thing of if women just left the agency to start their own agency, we would still be imbalanced. So part of our challenge is how do we say, we do value your opinion, we do want you here. And those are the things that I think we really have to work on right now, because one of the challenges I see is everybody's like, well, just hire more Black people, do this, do that. One of the really exacerbating challenges, and we're going to get to this in a second on COVID, is there aren't many agencies hiring right now. There aren't many opportunities to bring in new talent. We're trying to protect the talent we have. So to me, I think we really have to have a lot of focus on how do we create that velocity? How do we create better training? And you and I have talked about quite a few things, and Juan too, about what we can do with training and mentorship. So I'll let you guys talk a little bit about the things that we're doing as an industry.
Yeah, I'll just I'll jump in here really quick with some of the things we're currently doing, and obviously more to come. But I just wanted to comment a little bit on the why now question earlier, which is this has been brewing for a while, right? I think we saw a tipping point based on the reasons you guys alluded to earlier, which is, you know, we're working from home, sports are turned off, so people have a lot more attention to other sources of information and news and visuals and so on. But I think it's the volume started to mount before even the George Floyd incident. We had something that caught my attention, which happened in Central Park in New York, you know, where you had an incident there involving a Black woman walking her dog and a Black
white woman.
What's that? A white woman.
It was a white woman.
And so that was, you know, people started to see kind of the progression. But my point here is this is the first time personally that I've seen let's say the fight has come very close to our front door. The effort has been less concentrated on places that feel distant to us, and it's the first time that the conversation has come very close to our door. You know, Pete, you and I live in the LA area. I live in Santa Monica, where we saw, you know, a lot of activity a couple of weeks ago that was really, really close to us, and all of a sudden that made us think, you know, what am I doing to support or encourage this or change it? Down to our schools, you know, even through a Zoom environment, our school kids were talking about it. And so it forced us as parents, and then eventually as professionals, as leading teams, we have to acknowledge this and we have to talk about it. So I think the why now is acknowledging that there was a tipping point. This was something that had been kind of brewing for a while, and it just took that one image, right, to really kind of trigger the movement altogether. Back to your earlier question about training and development. The one thing that this has been positive for us, and I think for many organizations, is that it's shown how resilient we can be in a difficult time. And in the last 2 or 3 months, I think the 4As has pivoted very aggressively to making sure that we are fulfilling the needs of our members when it comes to training and development. More importantly, things like mental health and the challenges of managing teams in a remote environment, and offering sometimes the training that we had not really had in our rosters in the past. Most of our training in the past had been focused on what we call craft skills or leadership development skills, like account management and training on strategy and so on. But if you look at our site today, first of all, a lot of the things that we're doing are free of charge, and not only for the member community of the 4As, but all certain things we're making available for the overall agency industry, which is great. But the focus of some of this stuff has brought in immensely to, again, look at other areas of diversity and inclusion, of racial bias, we've even gotten into the podcast arena with audio. And so I'm very proud of the things that we've done as a team and as a group to say, look, a lot of our events, like our national events, had to be canceled, had to be postponed. We've put an immense amount of content on our website that we're distributing on a weekly and a bi-weekly basis, and refreshing, that addresses what our membership and agencies are going through right at this moment.
Yeah, it's a great time to transition to the topic of agency health and what are we doing with COVID. As you know, I'm a big fan of the 4As, and I'm really, really pleased and proud of the effort that the 4As has made in the last 3 months to really support me as an agency leader and give me tools and information and the curation of so much information. We've all been overloaded by stuff, and we do very much appreciate the tools and resources that you guys have brought us, and can't thank you enough for that. I think that resiliency and that ability to sort of pivot is a great way to start the conversation about COVID. To me, I think the most amazing thing about the last 3 months, when you take out the last 3.5 weeks, has been how easily and how quickly agencies have just flipped this switch and said, go work from home, we'll figure it out. The ability to work from home, and let's be fair, we didn't not try this before, we just didn't have the tools in place today made this easy. And we as an industry, and industry in general, haven't basically taken advantage of what I would say the last 2 to 3 years have given us, which is the real ability to put all our work in the cloud, the real ability for people to be sitting elsewhere and still participate and still be a part of the conversation. But as much as I'm impressed by that resilience, we still face a lot of challenges as an industry. Some of these were challenges that were facing us anyway, that this group has talked about for the last 3 or 4 years, that COVID just amplified and made worse. So I'll let you guys talk a little bit about what you're seeing with COVID in general, and I'll chime in.
Yeah, it's interesting because it always feels like so long ago, because the conversation has so moved on, yet is still so present, because we had started dealing with return to office and what that looks like, and had put out guidance, and a lot of agencies are dealing with that right now, especially depending upon what state you're in. It's so different. But it was incredible to see how quickly everyone pivoted, to your point. And I think it goes to show what agencies, like at the core, the people are just figure it out kind of people. I always say that. And just the ability to make it happen, and what is going to be the lasting impact, that's what we're all questioning right now, especially from a production standpoint. There used to be the pushback of, well, it's going to take this amount of time and we have this process we have to go through. And people have proven that paradigm wrong, right? Like paradigms have been shattered. We're never going, you don't get the luxury of taking a couple months, let alone a couple weeks to do content creation, production, forget about all of that. You're now turning things around in like a week's time. So that is also really challenging on people just trying to keep up with that pace, because it was such a flurry of we've got to get this done and we've got to make it happen. But I also think it goes back to what this industry is all about, and that's creativity and just making things happen. So you and I had a conversation, Pete, that kind of inspired me. I actually wrote an op-ed this week that finally got published in Adweek. Interestingly, I wrote it over 3 weeks ago. So I wrote it before everything happened with George Floyd, but it was really about creativity and kind of the power of partnership that exists between agencies and clients, the value that agencies bring, some of the hopeful lasting effects. And it does connect into diversity and inclusion, because if you can work anywhere, you don't have to hold yourself to, okay, we need someone to physically be in this city, in this office. And it has held back a lot of agencies from truly delivering the kind of diversity that they have wanted. And so to me, this just opens up the possibilities of the kind of talent that you can have access to, and your ability to bring in different ways of thinking. So to me, it's very exciting. Agencies are dealing with clients that are decreasing their spending, or clients that are in categories that were tough. Some are doing well. So we've got a mix of agencies right now, depending upon where they're at with their client composition, who either have not gone through any furloughs or layoffs, who are actually growing, who are strong, especially if you have healthcare as a category. So this has been kind of interesting for us to see how we manage the spectrum of agencies and what they're dealing with. But we've obviously moved now, it's been 3 months, we've moved beyond the stage of, is this temporary or is this habit? And I think a lot of it has moved into, this is new habit, this is new behavior. People are questioning their real estate footprint right now. What does the future of work look like? It's very exciting to think about where that is all going and what we can do. And I'm truly hoping that we take the approach that we took to COVID and being really creative, and we start to apply it to the racism situation and the issues that we've been dealing with for so long. And we just finally say, once and for all, we have to deal with this, and we have to recognize that change must happen now.
Yeah, I'll give you my perspective, Pete, because I come from a more of a consulting and tech background, and I think one thing I'm very excited. I was always surprised when I kind of went into the agency side that this was one of the few industries that plays in that tech consulting space more and more, that continue to resist the distributed workforce environment, right? And it's something that always caught my attention. How we always still required teams to be in the same place, in the same city, and so on. And so one big positive for me out of all this is to see how a model that we had resisted for such a long time is now proving to be successful. And we have a couple of agencies in our membership that have gone full on into a distributed workforce environment and have proven, to be very successful, have continued to kind of tell that story as, and, this model works. There's tools, there's technology, people can be creative, can collaborate. But it just, didn't really catch much attention. And I am very positive to think that going forward, we're going to see more and more agencies do that from a talent perspective, from a distributed workforce perspective. One example I have, even as of internships, a couple agencies told us that they were not only considering or hiring interns for the summer on a virtual capacity in the US, but they had opened and started to consider international candidates as far away as Brazil, one agency in San Francisco told us that they had one intern that was joining from Brazil. And again, Brazil's well known for their creative talent. So you can kind of start seeing some of the glimpses of, hey, we're probably going to be able to, if you think about the future of work at agencies, it might be a major shift in the way that we collaborate and that we are creative with each other, and going into this new distributed workforce environment.
So I totally agree. And I think we've talked about this before, but LA suffers this problem worse than other cities because we're so decentralized and we have terrible public transportation. So our people spend an hour to 4 hours a day commuting. If you are young and trying to raise a family, especially if you don't come from a socioeconomic background where your parents can subsidize your first few years in advertising, it's very difficult to work in this industry. And it is a part of our challenge. It's also a part of our challenge that we have young parents who are so strapped and so stressed. And by the way, those young parents are the ones who are most anxious to get back to work because they need the ability to focus, but they are, and I always say that, get back to the office.
Yes.
Everybody's working. I hate the term get back to work because everybody in advertising knows we never stopped working. We just stopped going to the office. So I do think that in LA, it's a significantly more important challenge because I can't get on the subway or be at the office in a 15-minute walk or take public transportation. So all that time is wasted.
Well, but just so you know, in New York, it's still very expensive and a lot of people live very far away, and because to live in the city is still expensive. So I think it's great because it opens up the possibilities, as you say.
Agree.
And as a former Valley girl, I know it's hard when LA is so spread out and getting around is not easy. So just think about telling someone, maybe you come into the office once or twice a week, you check in. We have to figure out what is the purpose of the office? What is the role of the office moving forward too?
Absolutely. I think it's also what we found with Zoom and Teams and all these tools is they work really, really well in a one-to-one to one-to-one. It's going to be actually a little harder when we start having 6 people in a conference room and 6 people in individual workstations. So we're all working on different work, return to work or return to office plans, and they're very much affected by different things. The state of California, it's really funny. The government said, here's the phases. When you get to 14 days of decline, you can do this. California was really conservative, and all of a sudden it's like the political and economic pressure is so strong that even though cases are still rising, we're starting to open up businesses. As a businessman who has clients who can't just keep working the way we have, I appreciate the effort to do that. As a human being, I've always felt like if you want the economy to be good, then let's make sure people are healthy. If people are healthy, then they can go to work. If they can go to work, they can get paid. And if everybody's getting paid, then the stock market's good. I believe that our government looked at it and said, how do we protect the stock market? And the health came second. And that's why the impact has been so big. That was political. I try to avoid being political, but as we know, it's driving what's happening in our business. We did this backwards, but right now there's this pressure, and even Gavin Newsom, who's very liberal and wanted to be very protective, and Eric Garcetti in LA are opening things back up. So we're going to get to ways of doing it, but part of the challenge is if you can come back to the office, but you have to wear a mask and you have to avoid conference rooms and kitchens and any place that you gather, that's not the office I want to come back to. I miss the people, not the kitchen. So it'll be interesting to see. One thing that I did want to touch on before we get to the Q&A, another topic that the three of us have gotten onto. One of the other good byproducts to me of COVID is because we've had the challenges that our clients, and like you say, some industries are growing, some industries are the same, many industries are hurt. One of the things that's really happened is one role agencies have always played in the ecosystem of managing a client's business is we've always been the people who spoke directly to consumers, and we've been the people in the last 10 and 20 years who have all the listening tools from social media and things like that. So over the years, the last 5 or 10 years, I would say corporations have been pushing down the value of marketing a little bit, and the need to manage finances and cut costs have gotten more important. So we've talked about the rise of procurement and the sort of pushing down of the CMO. One of the things that's happened in the last 3 months is the CMO's role has risen to great importance in companies again. And one of the things that's happened with that is the CMOs are paying attention to the agency and really asking questions and really listening to the answers, instead of just being sucked into the vortex of, well, this status meeting, that project, this monthly thing. So can you guys talk a little bit about what you're seeing regionally and more nationally on that front?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and something you had shared with me, and I thought it was so interesting because you had also shared that you were seeing that you were starting to have the right conversations with clients, that the minutia was sort of pushed to the side, and that it was getting back to the substantive conversations, and decision making is much faster as a result of that. And so there's an expectation now, if you can move faster because people are making decisions, that's great. I do think it's important that, as marketing often within a company is looked at as cost versus investment, that we get back to the emphasis on the investment side and what is the delivery and the impact of it. Because marketers need that help. They need to go and fight with their own management often to justify it. And right now, I think that it's going to be challenging coming out of this period for certain brands, because what has happened is sampling. There are a lot of people that have not remained loyal. I'll use toilet paper as an example. I think I have been loyal to Charmin for decades. I couldn't buy it. I couldn't find it. That's kind of a necessity. I just bought what I could. So they're going to be sent. So that's an opportunity, but it's also an issue for brands. So I think there's a real focus now on, well, what can you do to try and gain new users, maintain maybe some of the new users, and what that's going to look like. But that's going to take marketing investment, and you're going to have to be focused in on that. We've also seen a huge shift to online shopping. I don't think that will all stay, but I think the majority of it will. And so new behaviors, what does that look like? There's just tremendous opportunity. And I really hope that this also demonstrates to marketers the value of the agency, the external thinking, the provocation that comes, the connection to culture and what is happening with people, that gets them to understand that having an in-house team isn't necessarily going to deliver the kind of speed and agility and perspective that you need.
I think I'll just say briefly that what I've seen from a regional standpoint in talking to agency leaders is, brands, especially now, have appreciated having the agency perspective. I think brands have been very focused and in the last couple of years in the 6 months ahead, and the next quarter, because of the speed at which things are changing now. Having an agency in your roster that can pivot quickly, that can provide other points of view because they work with other clients, because they have other offices, because they're exposed to other scenarios, and they have to deal with those things themselves, has been an invaluable resources for brands and CMOs to be able to have that lifeline to say, this is new for us. This is not something we had dealt with in the past. What do you guys think? And agencies, again, I think have proven their value by being able to respond with resiliency, with the right trusted business advice, and again prove that value from a creative standpoint, from a media standpoint, but more importantly from a consultative standpoint, which is always a place that we want our agencies to be in.
Susan's going to come back in. I think we've got some questions. One topic that I wanted to touch on before we move back is the idea of mental health. We touched on it a little bit. I think that we all really, really need to focus as individuals, as companies, as industries, and figure out how can we help support mental health. I really appreciate the tools that have been shared. ThinkLA and the 4As have both done a great job with this. And I think that aside from the fact that we miss the human contact, we have two groups of people that I feel especially concerned about. Those that live alone, because the isolation that you choose to have by living alone is broken by your ability to go out and socialize and go to work and see people. And I've really seen an impact on the people that are isolated. The other is, of course, parents. I have two kids that are 28 and 26, which tells you how old I am, but it also says how relieved I am. It is so difficult. And I think one of the things we've tried to do to support parents is say, don't worry about your kid coming into the screen. Don't worry about somebody screaming in the background. It's how quickly we flipped the switch and said, whatever. I mean, we all remember BBC Dad, and now it's like BBC Dad happens on almost every call. So we're over it. And I think that's great, but I still recognize an incredible amount of pressure on parents to deal with the challenges. And the other part of mental health is we know that this is creating strife in families, this is creating strife in couples, and we weren't meant to be locked in the same room for this much time with each other. And I think that the more we can do to make sure that we're supporting each other and being considerate of each other, the better. And I'm happy that all our organizations are focused on that. But if anybody wants to comment.
I was just going to say, I think the stress and the anxiety is very real for every person, and depending upon what your situation is, the anxiety of COVID, the anxiety of what is happening right now in our country with systemic racism, especially for people of color, especially for Black people. It's very intense right now. And we have to just be sensitive to that. And my kids are 16 and 18, and I have a really good friend who has a 3.5-year-old and a 15-month-old, and it's really intense for her, and what she has to try and juggle. And she doesn't necessarily work for people that are all understanding that she's in this situation and her husband's working. And so we've tried to say to people, you have do whatever you need to do, flex your hours, but we get it. And we also have to be sensitive that not everyone every day is on. Christine Fruchty, the CEO of Cole McVoy, asked a great question, and I try and ask it in one-on-ones, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today professionally, and how are you feeling personally? And I've done it as polls within my team, and it really says a lot, but just checking in with people is just so important. We just did a partnership with a company called I Am Here to help with mental health and wellness. We've offered a number of webinars, but it's more than that. It's being there for your colleagues and being there to support. We keep reminding people about our employee assistance program. This is not going to end when theoretically we're back to the office. This is going to last for a while. And I don't think we've all even begun to deal with how it's really impacting us, because we no longer have our commute time. My commute time is less than a minute.
Yeah, I'll just say that for sure. I mean, if there's, we talked about the pluses of the COVID and the distributed work environment as something that we'll see as a plus in the future. This is definitely a minus. You know, this is a drawback that's come with the pandemic and working from home, and it's affected, you know, certain people harder than others. What I saw, there was a presentation one of our agency members, CEOs, did for their team, and I saw 5 things that he pointed out that I thought were important. We just have to adapt to a new routine. We have to provide the programs, and different agencies are doing different things. But personally, there's things that we can do, and he cited a couple. One of them was say good night, right? One of the things that is really being a big stressor is that days tend to feel like weeks tend to feel like one long day, because people are working from the same place that they sleep, and you don't have that separation. So having a way to, you know, completely separate and say good night is important. Phone a friend was another one that caught my attention, right? And some agencies have been very good about starting to create mini networks within their agencies, right? So if you're a parent with children of a particular age, they're out of school, 5 or 6 of those are able to, it's like that lifeline, and they call each other, and they talk about, things that they might be able to do together virtually, or, hey, I did this, try that. Same thing with elderly parent care and folks that are dealing with that. So I think we have to acknowledge that it has been particularly difficult for those two groups, and that we're still trying to figure out how we're gonna address it in the long run.
Especially as it drags on longer and longer. We all left the office thinking it could be 2 months, and now we know it's going to be a lot longer. So we could talk about both these topics forever, but Susan's got some questions that have come up that I think would be a good time to start.
Yeah, a couple questions for you. This comes from Matt Steffel, our friend. As the industry looks towards recovery, how do you think all of the changes will impact freelance versus full-time employment, and AOR versus project work? I know we've
already seen this. We've already seen an impact to this already. Project work will increase. We've already seen a bit of that happening. It's important that new business pitching continue, and it has continued. Clearly that's critical. And we also have seen an impact on freelancers or independent contractors, because a lot of agencies eliminated that when they were trying to address cash flow and costs. So I think that will come back, and it'll be great because you'll have more flexibility, and those people will have more flexibility. And you'll be able to reach out to people anywhere, and you won't have to be bound to any particular city. So that will happen. I think that it's important that we support that community. And we, as the 4As had said, we usually say you have to be an agency member to get access to all of our content, including our training. We've given access to people within the community who are independent contractors or who have lost their jobs. There's also a website, Grace Blue Transition, for anyone who has lost their job, and we are supporting that you can go onto that site. You can both post jobs as well as find jobs. So it will take some time, but we're going to see a shift there.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see a speed up of the process, especially when you're thinking about AORs and that kind of discussion. We've seen, that hasn't stopped, but it's gotten a lot faster in terms of the decision-making process and some of the steps in the dance of pitching a new business. They've shortened it, kind of short and sweet, and that's not necessarily a negative. A lot of agency leads have seen that as a positive. You're getting results sooner. You're putting less effort into it, and so I think that's a good thing. On the workforce side, and the project-based work, again, I think we are going to see an increase of that, and particularly because as agencies again consider this idea of distributed workforce, it's going to be a way for them to tip their toe in the water, right, and to bring some of these assets and resources on a freelance capacity up front to see, does this really work out? Can I hire somebody in Denver while I sit in San Francisco, and the time difference, and and I think freelance is going to be the first entry point into that before they switch back to hiring more FTEs on a distributed workforce environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a little bit of a double-edged sword to being a freelancer right now. When you're a freelancer, hiring outside is the first thing to go. But when we have a shrinking economy and a shrinking fee base from our clients, agencies are getting leaner and trimmer. And when they get leaner and trimmer, the only way to get bigger again is to reach out and get help. So I think it's a difficult question to predict perfectly, because one of the things we were going to talk about here is, what does the recovery look like? Because the recovery is different for every sector. So it depends on who your clients are. I have Southwest Airlines as a client. They're not doing a lot right now. I have Farmers Insurance as a client. Business hasn't changed that much for them. Then there's Honda and Lazy Boy and all those people in between where, maybe their production slowed down. Maybe their ability to sell has slowed down. But that could ramp back up quickly if the economy moves quickly. So I think it's a sector by sector, relationship by relationship. In general, I assume that we are going to be in a little bit of a recession at the very least. We're not going to be able to expand because there's too much money that has been taken out of the average consumer's pocket. to be able to just go right back to spending at the crazy levels that we were before. So I think it's going to be a little bit tough, but not impossible.
Yeah. Another question that came through too, and we've talked about this on other webinars too, you know, are we going to get back to in-person meeting with our client and vendor partnerships? I know that everybody's kind of in this waiting game, but I think for that vendor community, there's such value in having that face-to-face connection. Do you see that happening and anytime soon? Are you still getting the exchange you want from those vendor client partnerships?
It's interesting you say that, because we had a major publisher reach out to ask about return to office, because they were trying to figure out, would sales calls happen? What's the cadence of that? How are you dealing with that, Pete?
You know, it's a challenge. One of the things that, one of the first things we did as we went through the stages of leaving the office in 8 days, right? We start with, hey, this is getting serious. If you're sick at all or you feel anything, stay home. If you've been in contact with anybody, stay home. And if you're scared to come in, stay home. And 2 days later it was stay home if you can. 2 days after that was stay home whether you want to or not. I think that the rolling back in is going to happen much slower. But one of the first things that we did and that the CDC recommended was to limit the exposure to people who you can't control, right? So our own audience, we're communicating and we're making sure that people are recognizing, if I'm this, then I don't do that, and not to put other people at risk. It's very hard to apply that risk to people who aren't a part of your circle. So I think that it's going to be a little while before we do it. I will say this, I think it's a very difficult time to be in sales, partly because we're all buying less, both from a media point of view and a services point of view. We're all in a little bit of a cost cutting and retrenching mode. And there aren't those events where networking occurs. I do think that the more we can find ways for sales calls to exist in the same way that these kinds of things exist and get comfortable with it, that it's okay. I do think it's a difficult time to start a relationship that didn't already exist. You know, if you already have a relationship with the person at Google or the person at Oracle or the person from, you know, Time Inc., then there's no problem with continuing that dialogue. It's very difficult to get my attention right now for something new, partly because I'm not buying, and partly because I just have so many priorities to deal with right now. It's difficult. So I think it's going to be a challenge to open our doors to outside people, when for the most part, we're going to open our doors to the people that really need to and want to be here first, but we're going to try to keep the people that don't need to and want to be here away, so that it makes it safer for those that do need to be here. So I think the in-person meetings are going to be a challenge. We do have some clients and industries where they're essential and they're not impacted. And for them, it's business as usual. And those are going to be the ones that are probably the bigger transitional challenge.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely going to be a while. My opinion is we're not going to get back to what we had before, and if we do at all, in a very long time. And we're gonna be doing a lot more of this, you know, the virtual communication. To put it in the words of Sir Martin Sorrell and some of the other well-known agency execs, you know, they've said, you know, we were used to being on a plane most of the time, right? We were always traveling, having these face-to-face client meetings, and we've realized for the next 3 months that we have not had the necessity to do so, and business has still been able to flow. So I think there's going to be a major shift in the way that we're doing business. And again, a couple of years, vaccine is found, things go back to normal, maybe. But I think this is going to be the same as e-commerce. You know, we're going to see e-commerce accelerate dramatically over the last couple of months, and it's not necessarily going to go back to the way it was before. So I think the same way with, you know, interpersonal, in-person communication.
Well, I think we could keep talking. There's lots and lots to discuss around this. What I'm hoping for is that we can actually get together again and talk about this, you know, as things progress. I do hope too that ThinkLA can continue to support what the 4As is doing and help amplify all the great work you're doing. especially around the diversity survey too. I know I'm looking forward to that, and that's something that we can share. And we will send out some of those resources that were talked about on the webinar. We'll make sure that we send that out. Pete, any final remarks from you? Nope. Are you unmuted, Pete?
Yes, I am muted.
There you go.
There you go.
It's what the green light's
We
supposed to be.
almost made it through.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Marla and Juan for coming and giving us the time. I really appreciate the support that we get from ThinkLA and from the 4As in the industry, and it means a lot. And these are the times when coming together and sharing solutions and sharing feedback and what's working. We all need to benefit from these things, and these are not competitive times. I think they are collaborative times. So appreciate the role that you guys all play in bridging and sharing what's working so that we can apply them to our own individual situations.
That's a great quote. I'm going to steal it for some of my forum meetings. Competitive time, not a competitive time, a collaborative time. Love it.
I always say collaboration over competition.
Yeah.
That's what we're
It's about community.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, just a couple announcements too. Again, check out upcoming events with 4As and with ThinkLA. There's a lot of amazing content happening right now. We'll be sending out a survey after this event too to get your feedback. Much like the 4As, we're creating content as needed based on feedback from our members. Thank you all for showing up today. Thank you for the great conversation, and hopefully more to come soon. And we'll talk to you very soon about what's going on too with that diversity survey. I'm anxious to get that and share that with our community. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete and Susan.
Thanks,
All right.
Pete. Thanks, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Juan. Bye.